Hello, everyone. Welcome, and thank you all for joining today's Infoblox webinar on ransomware. My name is Navneet, and I will be your host for today's session. Today's session will be about 60 minutes, and it will be recorded. A replay of this session, along with a PowerPoint presentation, will be sent to you all after the live event in about 24 to 36 hours. Also, you are all welcome to submit your questions throughout the session today through the Q&A box that's on the left bottom side of your screen. And we will answer as many questions as we can at the conclusion of the presentation. And for today's presentation, we have with us Mike Zuckerman. He is a consulting product marketing manager here at Infoblox. So without further ado, I'll pass it along to Mike. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Navneet. Today we're going to share our threat intelligence update. We'll talk about the persistence of ransomware, the new variants you're going to face, better tactics to defend and defeat them. While I am personally your presenter, please know I am supported by a very deep bench of threat researchers here that build out the advisories and threat intel publications. So there's a lot of research behind this data. In terms of our agenda, we're going to start at a high level. It'll give us some context. Then we're going to dig deep into the variants. Some of our audience today is very technical, and I know some of the folks on the SOC team want to dig into this. And then we're going to rise again to a high level in summary where you're going to see common themes emerge that are valuable takeaways for all of you. So we'll look at the state of ransomware. We'll touch on targeted ransomware, look at some of the examples of these threats, the financial duress they've caused, and the trauma they've caused. We'll look at ransomware as a service, and we'll take a very close look at the 7 variants that you see there from Grandcrab through Sodinokibi, and specifically share some of the research that our team has uncovered, some of the very recent. Key takeaways, of course, are where ransomware is today. It's serious, and it's here to stay, and it's going to get worse before it gets better. How ransomware variants will differ, and the defensive tactics that will work. And you'll see common themes here emerge again and again that you can use. So what is the state of the ransomware union? Well, at first look, the good data is that the number of ransomware incidents in 2018 seems to have decreased substantially. But don't let that mislead you. The bad, and perhaps the ugly, is that what we call enterprise-focused ransomware attacks are up 12%. So wherever you are in the cyber defense of your organization, you need to know that ransomware has not gone away. Attacks on individuals have been reduced, but targeted attacks on enterprise, targeted ransomware, the most dangerous and sophisticated, are charging forward. Targeted ransomware uses, attacker research to select targets, based upon vulnerability or the valued cost of disruption to that enterprise or that government agency, rather than just shooting out, massive and unfocused campaigns against email lists or websites they can corrupt. And targeted ransomware uses the tactics, techniques, and procedures that can be repeated easily, generally uses standard tools, and has very strong analysis evasion techniques. All businesses, whether you're small, medium, or large, are a threat. And it's a business. Targeted ransomware is deployed by organized crime. There are rumors now and again in the ransomware community that certain cash-hungry rogue nation states are also in the mix. So it's something that we take very seriously. Ransomware is an old business. It's been around 30 years, and we see, unfortunately, a big future for it continuing. So targeted ransomware has really gone after the enterprise. SamSam used to be the only targeted ransomware gang in business. Something called Ryuk started in 2018, and now we have a barrage arriving on the scene. It's not hundreds, but these are all sophisticated organizations that spend money, that have, significant teams of personnel working night and day to attack our networks and get our money. This particular data I'm referencing is from the Symantec Internet Security Threat Report. Our threat intelligence team constantly reviews data from other sources and publicly available information. Sharing raw intelligence allows everyone to build the most complete picture of threats and trends. If you look at it more closely, right now, targeted ransomware is just pounding U.S. enterprise. Per the data source, again, same data source, Symantec, the U.S. has been hardest hit as the SAM group has been targeting us for quite a bit, but right behind us, the UK, Turkey, Australia, and Canada follow. Don't misread this. If you're a caller today, we have some international callers. If you're from South Korea or you're from, some other market and you say, well, this isn't going to bother me, these criminals have developed their tactics, techniques, and procedures using the U.S. market as their test bed. We expect these newly acquired skills to be put to use in other markets. These attacks can rapidly scale up against particular industries and countries in just a month or two. So don't relax yet. Be alert. Just one example, a few examples of what's really going on out there is the targeted ransomware assault on cities. And it's not just, limited to the United States. One example is the city power utility in Johannesburg, South Africa. In Lake City, Florida, they paid a ransomware this past June. This past June, Riviera Beach in Florida was hit by a ransomware attack and made a payment. In May, the city of Baltimore was hit with a ransomware attack that knocked out most of the city servers and government apps. In April, Augusta, Maine, and Cleveland Hopkins International Airports suffered attacks, as did the city of Tallahassee. Some resulted in a lot of disruption. Most resulted in payment. In March, Albany, New York suffered a ransomware attack which hit the police department systems and caused, impacted the computers and control cars, as well as in Jackson County, Georgia. A large attack resulted in the payment of $400,000 after the county's computer systems were just shut down. The Atlanta, Georgia attack, I think we all know, caused quite a bit of disruption. That was heavy in the press and was last reported to have cost that city $17 million. And finally, the Colorado DOT had their computers shut down in February due to SamSam virus attacks. So there's a lot of activity, and it's going after the enterprises that can least afford it, which is why, in some cases, the ransomware gets paid. A closer look just at the state of Texas. Texas, in this anatomy of an attack, got hit by 22 concurrent targets. Was hit against 22 targets at the same time, and this single source wanted, of course, a modest $2.5 million to let them off the hook. So these are researched, these are planned, and they are designed to be devastating in effect, and they are absolutely trying to extort you and hold you hostage. It was informally reported that Sodinokibi ransomware was the culprit, but we're waiting to get all the details, and some of them are being withheld, perhaps due to the investigation. Another one that's worth viewing as an anatomy of attack was the South Africa power utility, where in July they got hit that left some of their residents without power. It encrypted databases, apps, took their website offline. There were some customers that prepay for electricity in Africa. They'll get online and they'll buy a week, right? I mean, it's just kind of how the system works there. And they were unable to get electrical service at all. Also, the city power utility could not respond to blackouts. All of their, maintenance and command and control systems were hurt potentially in some way. So ransomware can be extremely damaging. It's a lot worse than it used to be when it just locked up your PC at home. It's very sophisticated, and it's costing us a lot of money. To get a sense of that, let's look at this high cost of extortion, right? So if you pay the freight, right? If you pay the freight, you can see the city of Riviera Beach paid $600,000 to regain access to files. Alternately, Lake City, Florida paid $500,000 to gain access to files, right? I think of this as the pay me now extortion. Now, if you say what was the pay me later, which is, the high cost of recovery, you can see that Atlanta, Georgia was hit with $17 million to recover, not verified by the city, but publicized in the press. Colorado DOT was hit with what might end up to be about $2 million in expense. And Baltimore City, Maryland, their budget office, as quoted in the press, estimates that the ransomware attack may cost them over $18 million. Now, this is the pay me later. Now, so just because the cost of the pay me now was lower than the pay me later, it's not to recommend, either course of action. My recollection is the FBI has published a technical guidance document, how to protect your networks from ransomware. But they tell you pretty clearly that, you pay the ransom, you may not get access to your data, because they know that there are many examples where people did not get decryption keys. There are many examples of victims who paid and were promptly retargeted again. There are many examples of people who paid and were asked to pay more to get the decryption key. And, of course, the obvious reason not to pay is, encouraging the criminal business model. So it's a complex decision, and the best way out of this is to, take the steps necessary to avoid infection by this kind of scourge. At the heart of the problem, right, is ransomware as a service. This is a big business for organized crime. Just like any SaaS service, right? They want to, buyers of the service don't want to invest in everything. They want to run the latest software. They want to get support. I mean, they're supported like a customer, but they're willing to share fees. What they have is the social engineering to perhaps place at the delivery vehicle. They may have the email addresses, other things like that. So your criminal partner builds the ransomware, hosts it in the cloud, and gives you a configurable and easy deployable tool set. It is a big business, and it's making billions of dollars. So the criminals focus on identifying targets, planning social engineering, and thinking about their early attack vectors. Finally, don't rule out rogue nation states in addition to organized crime. And rogue nation states, without mentioning all the names we know, are also a dangerous force behind the scenes here. So now it's time to step deeper into the technology and take a close look at the ransomware variants. We're going to start with Grandcrab, and I think for those of you that are reading their kind note, I can't help but notice where they're sorry. That's, your data has been encrypted, but they have the solution, the Grandcrab decryptor. So there's your insult to injury immediately. And, when you're on the I team or the SOC team, or you run a department with a major application you support and you see this, you're already in pretty serious trouble, right? So Grandcrab, most interesting about Grandcrab was that on June 1, the threat actors behind Grandcrab announced that they would be shutting down their operations in, so many days, 20 days, right? And, this created a vacuum in the ransomware market space, really ultimately that would lead to increased competition between remaining or new variants, right, as they try to secure Grandcrab's market share for themselves. Notice on the note, $2 billion out of our pockets has become their profits, right? So, did Grandcrab really leave us on 1 June? Well, let's take a closer look. So between June 1 and June 4, the Infoblox threat, intelligence team observed an email campaign firsthand delivering password-protected Microsoft Word docs designed to infect victims with Grandcrab ransomware. So our team believes that this campaign is likely using a third generation of Grandcrab based on corroborating reports and some changes we observed in the malware's behavior since its second generation. So Grandcrab is not gone yet. It's not gone until we see for a protracted period of time that it is in fact gone, and we'll keep our eyes open. In terms of customer impact, we believe that they were targeting Scandinavian and English-speaking countries using exploit kits and malicious spam email. The messages sent to the victims tended to be vague. The victims were prompted to open an attached file, and the attachment was designed to trick the victim into running a script that, of course, infected them with the ransomware. Once that starts, Grandcrab encrypted the victim's files using RSA encryption and appended a .crab to each of them. And of course, once infected, the victim's desktop, exhibited the ransom note, and so on and so forth. And they were asked to pay a ransom, in cryptocurrency over the Tor network. In terms of how they really look, often the emails appear to be about an internship or a job opening. That was the trend of topic of late. Email subjects were general, such as about a career, and the files that were sent were encrypted Microsoft Word docx, all of which could be opened with a pretty simple password. I think the default was 123123. The bodies of the email messages simply state an opening and prompt the victim to open the attached resume CV. So the moral of the story is, right, to leverage vulnerability, Grandcrab gets the user's cooperation. This is a very common theme. This is why a lot of us have been sitting through these internal education courses sponsored by IT. You need to do it. You need to remind the users that probably 70, 80, 90% of the attacks that most of us will face based upon our industry and threat intelligence can be stopped by the user just not clicking on something and saying no, right? If you don't know where it's coming from, you're not sure about the intent, the email's vague, don't do it. And it's the same, you'll see these same themes for mitigation repeated over and over again during this presentation. Sodinokibi, which is quite a tongue twister, was observed in about 17 through 19 June by our threat research team, and once again using Microsoft Word documents. Sodinokibi is a relatively new ransomware as a service malware that seems to be gaining popularity, as observed by our threat intelligence team. In terms of customer impact, it was first identified, as we say, in the wild earlier this year, roughly in April, when threat actors exploited a vulnerability in Oracle WebLogic, which allowed them to install Sodinokibi on the vulnerable web servers. Like Grandcrab, Sodinokibi has this affiliate revenue system. It's a business where the threat actors can sign up as affiliates and start using the ransomware for no fee. But in exchange, they must give the author a percentage of their profits. So that's a very devastating business model because it leverages less sophisticated organized crime organizations and gets them to participate with the knowledge that they know. The fact that Sodinokibi is freely available means that its distribution methods may vary significantly depending on the threat actor that's involved with it. So in the recent campaign our threat intel team observed, Sodinokibi was imitating Booking.com, a legitimate hotel booking service, to entice users to open a malicious email attachment. So, those of you in IT and the SOC team or management or compliance, you really need to be on top of the users because this stuff begins and ends most of the time with user engagement. And, once the service said that you've got a new booking, invited them to look at the booking documents, they were hooked. And Sodinokibi was in. For vulnerability and mitigation, right? Again, the victim opens a malicious Microsoft Word document attachment, right? So what are the takeaways again? Implement attachment filtering so that you on the technology team can reduce the likelihood of malicious content getting to any of your users. You want to train users, they want to know not to open attachments from unexpected or unfamiliar senders. You want to sanitize attachments to potentially remove, harmful or active content. Definitely macros and Microsoft Office files, JavaScript, links to any executable downloads. These are just dead giveaways. Some of us, especially on this call, we're trained to not click on a link but inspect the URL. Recently, personally, in the past week, I received a bogus link to email from PayPal. And I looked at it right away and I saw the URL was modified and then something was off about the email. And of course I hit, delete immediately, right? So you've really got to, either not click on this stuff or have the savvy to inspect it, which is dangerous for your users, which is maybe okay for those of us on the call. You want to really monitor your networks for sign of compromise. The perimeter is broken as we used to know it, and you've really got to keep a vigilant view inside of your networks. And finally, watch out for things that want you to click installers. That's another area, because sometimes installers are not installing what you think they are, right? Cryptomix is an old ransomware with some really new tricks. It was first discovered in roughly Q1, March or so of 2016. And recently, the cyber intelligence community detected a new Cryptomix ransomware campaign that I find horribly exploited real stories of children diagnosed with cancer. So these cyber thieves have really hit rock bottom here. The campaign pretended to represent a real children's charity and then alleged that the victim's ransom payment was for a good cause. So that's about as low as you get, right? This was not the first time a Cryptomix campaign used a theme that pertained to sick children, but this was pretty much the first campaign this year that used real photos and stories. So, these things look real, they feel real, they get emotionally hooked to you, but they're not. They're malware and they're dangerous. The ransomware, unlike previous campaigns, was not delivered by email, but deployed after the networks were breached using an RDP brute force attack. And we're going to talk more about that. That's one of the new attacks of choice. And they seem to be a little easier for some of the attackers to implement. In terms of customer impact, Cryptomix has some unique characteristics for a ransomware. It doesn't change the desktop background image after it encrypts the files, and it doesn't, pop up a payment portal, but it leaves a ransom note in the form of a text file that explains how to contact the threat actor by email for payment instructions. Cryptomix campaigns tend to use emails, compromised websites with embedded scripts, and rig exploit kits. As I mentioned, the recent campaign scanned the internet for public-facing RDP servers by searching simply for the RDP port 3389 and then, brute forcing their way in with weak password and credential use. And that works, right? So many of these RDP servers have defaults in them or very simple things, because a lot of the IT team, these people are overworked. And it's hard to keep up with this stuff, but watch out, your RDP is now bullseye front and center. And once they got in, they were able to collect administrative credentials, move across the network, deploy the ransomware, and the ransomware would generate a file. It's one of these, it looked innocuous, _help_instruction.txt, but basically, contact the attackers to get your files back. And then it gave you 6 email addresses and said, reply to each. And so the victims that did this claimed that, they got a message that said, well, we're part of a children's charity organization. Here are the photos. Please submit your payment. And these photos came from legitimate crowdfunding websites. So finally, after they submitted payment, the victims received an email that gave them a one-time secret link to get the decryptor software. Insult to injury, red alert here, folks. Some of the users have reported that the decryptors were fake, just as the FBI said. So, once this software has deployed, you've got some very difficult business decisions to make. Cryptomix, once again, is an RDP brute force attack, right? So, security vendor out there, there's several that have decryptor tools that can be applied. But, this is a question of philosophy. You can have a decryptor tool, but if you're a large enterprise and you've been hit, you have a decision to make between, do we do really a cleanup and then back up our software, pull it from the backup, or do we try to go to 80 or 200 or 500 workstations and use the decryptor keys, right? So you have difficult decisions to consider. And, part of the security is just don't expose an RDP server to the public, set it behind a properly configured firewall, change your RDP port numbers. Attackers scan for publicly exposed RDP servers that are listening on TCP port 3389 or UDP port 3389. Keep your RDP upgraded and to really do the right thing, integrate two-factor authentication for RDP login. This raises the threshold on the attacker. If it's too much work, they'll go elsewhere, and you may dodge the bullet that day. Certainly limit the number of users who can access our remote desktops. And if you can enable network-level authentication, it's there by default in Windows 10 OS, but that can help buy you time and limit access by things like Cryptomix. Megacortex is a tough new threat. Sophos discovered this ransomware that was attacking their customers in the U.S., Italy, Canada, Netherlands, and other countries. Megacortex shows advanced capabilities that make it dangerous and that set it apart from traditional ransomware, and that during the attack enable it to propagate. Some have described it as worm-like to other devices on the target LAN. The victims that we are aware of reported that the attack was initiated from a compromised domain controller. Okay, so Megacortex copies its payload onto several devices in your network using a compromised domain controller and the interpreter reverse shell. This combination is unfortunately powerful because it enables that cyber thief to infect multiple devices and spread the ransomware all over your network pretty quickly. Megacortex is pretty sophisticated. It comes with features that enable it to disable up to 189 at last count running services, including, of course, security software. So that may remind you of stuff that used to get your PC 5, 6, 7 years ago that would shut off your security software. Well, that technique is alive and well and living. Infected users have been instructed to communicate with the cyber thief by email for ransom payment, and we don't have a lot of data on the actual ransom payments, but certainly they're in the context of the previous data we've seen. Interestingly enough, some of the networks that were attacked by Megacortex showed that Emotet and CACBot, I'm never sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly, were present. Using the domain controller, the attackers launched a Cobalt Strike script, which is, again, standard tool that the red team would use in your organization, via PowerShell, another standard tool. So Cobalt Strike opened a interpreter reverse shell that in turn connected to a remote command and control server. And I'll spare you the IP, but you can get that from our online threat report. The attacker issued commands, issued batch files via the reverse shell to orchestrate the ransomware attack. The malware executable, I believe, was called winit.exe. The malware launcher batch file, stop.bat, and a copy of PSExec 4. There's a lot of technical detail here, but you can see all of this if you go to our threat intel reports on the website, if you want to know more about the details. When it comes to threat intelligence, the details count a whole lot. In terms of the attack chain, we recommend to avoid Megacortex success, especially utilizing domain controllers or other malware like Emotet and CACBot. You want to run virtual domain controllers on a dedicated host. You want to keep users with physical domain controllers separate from other servers and really locked in a room to keep unauthorized access away. You want to audit pretty much all of your activities on domain controllers and really restrict membership to the domain administrators group. Emotet and CACBot, so are commonly delivered via email. So once again, we're back to, it's up to the user or up to your email filtering software or up to other things that you have that can, filter that stream and keep your users out of harm. But when you get prompted to click on a URL or open an attachment, most of the time your users should say stop, don't do it. Finally, of course, two-factor authentication, which has been around for years. Sometimes people felt it was a little slow to use, a little bit of an obstacle, but now it's becoming the essential the cognoscenti of cybersecurity know that two-factor is just de rigueur. It's what you've got to have now. And so most companies are implementing it a layer at a time across everything, as are the SaaS software providers and everybody else. Users should frequently back up their data offline because, again, if you have a large problem, it might be better to rebuild from backup than to pay some ransom and not get your files back anyway. And so you really want to have a backup system that backs up and then disconnects, goes offline. We'll talk about, I think, some other ransomware that's smart enough to look for backup copies. So you've got to do a backup and then segregate and restrict that backup. And I remember the old days of, carrying the backup tapes out and locking them. Sometimes the VP of engineering would put a set in his or her home. We have better ways to do that, but the fundamental premise that you're keeping it off the network is critical and important. Also, use Yara rules to find binaries that are signed using CN and other addresses that are unique to Megacortex. You can find some of this stuff on GitHub. Once again, it's in our research note, and we'd be glad to share more with you. Ryuk really came to light towards the end of last year, and Malwarebytes actually reported on targeted attacks that were distributing Ryuk and had crippled pretty thoroughly two companies. One was a cloud hosting provider, and the other was a major and the umbrella company, a major publisher, and I believe it was Tribune Publishing. And these infections were again reported to be secondary payloads of Emotet, and in this case, TrickBot. So, Emotet, again, is distributed via malicious email, and it's capable of stealing credentials and downloading additional malware. TrickBot is another Trojan known for targeting users of specific banks. It can steal cryptocurrency wallets. And so once these things are loose in your network and Ryuk is out there, it will start immediately trying to encrypt your files and encrypt network drives. It's also running a Windows batch script to delete, after encryption, to delete the encryption key, shadow copies of files, any backup files it could find. So it really makes a mess of your infrastructure. And in some cases, you would argue that you really have to do a rebuild. It depends on what you've been hit with and how big you are and how, many of us, we all have backups. but how easy really is it? And in smaller companies, sometimes it's impossible, right? So you really have to see where you guys are at the time you have a problem. In their notes, the authors threatened to increase the ransom payments each day until the victim would pay. So I have deleted, my expletive has been deleted from my notes here, but there's no mercy out there. Also note that Malwarebytes and Checkpoint Research feel that there are similarities between Ryuk and other ransomware which is built by Lazarus. Lazarus seems to be a North Korean advanced persistent threat group. So, it's not just organized crime you may be dealing with. These are serious threats and they're after your money. And, we certainly have more data about this to share. In terms of, vulnerability and mitigation, right? The song remains the same. Ryuk ransomware has been delivered as a secondary payload in targeted attacks on networks already infected with malware, right? So it's the same themes again. Train users about phishing and how to handle it. Require strong passwords. Stay up to date on firmware and patches. Back up data and systems regularly, off-site, i.e. off connection to your existing network once it's done, to eliminate the impact of ransomware against your backup and store all that off the network as well. And you really have to do these things because the attackers are very sophisticated. And if you have a backup on the network, a lot of them will find it. Shade ransomware we'll cover briefly, and then we'll talk about Radio EK. Shade has been around since 2014, but continues to plague us. In August, our threat intel group detected a large number of emails that were distributing Shade to Russian-speaking users. There was a change in the malware process from what we'd seen before. They sent out archive files that were password protected, and then the email gave you the password to unlock it. Shade is using, of course, AES 256 encryption. And in this particular case, it was encrypting on files with specific extensions, such as text, PNG, CSV, left the ransom node in the desktop folder of the device, and of course, requests your money. All of the emails had Russian language subject lines with a billing or invoice theme, and these translated to, good day, documents are attached. Of course, the prize was, you open the RAR file and you're infected, and over 80% of the emails had that file. We cover this because we feel that, it's just not going to be left to Russia. These things will spread quickly, and we expect to see examples of this propagate our way over time. In terms of vulnerabilities and mitigation, once again, it's the common theme, user training. Windows OS administrators should disable the use of wsscript.exe in the Active Directory. wsscript.exe is often used to run malicious JavaScript, and your users don't need it, right? You need some reputable email filtering solutions for security that can detect malicious attachments. Big heads up to users. RAR files, archive files. If someone sends you an RAR file, do not open that. It should be almost common sense. It's not, but for those of us in the business, it is. And of course, create backups. There is a decryptor at nomoreransom.org, but I think it's much better to stay out of trouble and understand how this can propagate. And if we see it in our local markets, English-speaking markets, we'll know how to handle it. On September 9th, the cybersecurity research group called NAOSEC, N-A-O-SEC, reported a campaign spread by malicious advertising. So it's maladvertising. You get an ad, and you click it, and away it goes. And it uses, in this case, a radio exploit kit to infect your systems with NEMT ransomware. And empty ransomware is nasty stuff. It uses, a combination of AES and RSA encryption. And the RSA encryption is a bit unusual for what's been done. It uses an exploit which is CVE 2016-01892 to execute arbitrary code. And it's kind of a drive-by attack. So, they actually purchase ads in the advertising network to legitimately distribute the ad on some compelling topics, maybe stolen from someone else, and then your user clicks it and they're done, right? So, vulnerabilities and mitigation, this is a tougher one, right? You want to keep computers and endpoints up to date with the latest security patches to block known vulnerabilities. You want to keep your browsers up to date. Automatic updates should be set in place. You really need ad blockers to protect against maladvertising and strong antivirus tools, to detect and clean. The same comments made before about backup. But I think what's really interesting about, radio EK loading empty is that they're using maladvertisements. So your users can get email, they can click on an ad on a website or someplace else, or they can go to a website and get infected there. Any place they turn today, ransomware is targeting them, and awaiting them. So to sort of bring, closure here and then move to questions over the next few slides, we're seeing very, very, very common themes, right? It's about the user still, clicking on macros, clicking on installers, clicking on email links, opening RAR files, right? These are the things that are bringing in a lot of the historic revenue. And I think, as IT or security or compliance or management professionals, your cheapest insurance as you leave this webinar is to focus on user training. You've got to put them through that stuff. You've got to remind them not to click. You've got to explain to them the damage, and why they need to protect our core infrastructure. That's key. The other key theme that's emerging is the RDP attack vector, which is much more complex, right? It's complex because it's a targeted attack. They're using brute force to change credentials, and then they're escalating their ability to get through the enterprise rapidly. So, and this is a problem because many enterprises still use RDP instead of a VPN for work or home remote access. I mean, I know that, right? Some of you out there are thinking the same thing, right? Many businesses, smaller businesses, don't even know that an RDP service is running on a public-facing server because it's been started by another service or a misconfiguration. So put RDP on your hit list, but this is where you're vulnerable. Guidance for your users, right? Never, ever. I remember there was a movie where it said, don't ever feed these things after midnight, right? Well, never, ever enable macros. That is pretty much easily the cause of ransomware pain, right? Be cautious of archive files, especially small ones, .zip, .rar. I mean, you guys and gals out there know, right? Be very aware of the files type. Don't open, .vbs, right, .command. Anything that looks grammatically strange or broken or weird, hint, hint, coming from Eastern Europe, right, or someplace else, don't open it. Be suspicious. Even at this moment, right now in your organizations, chances are your users are being socially engineered right now. The best practices for you, it's the user education. Go back to the previous slide. Assess threat intelligence to understand the threats you will most likely face and assess the risk and act accordingly to mitigate the high-risk items. Iterate, wash, rinse, repeat, right? Everyone does not face the same risks, and everyone cannot handle and manage against all risks. So, you cannot protect yourself against everything all the time, but you can prepare to defend against likely threats. That's why threat intelligence is so important, by geography, by industry, and by the nature of the threat. Respectfully submitted, consider approaches to wrap your threat intel strategy around, DDI, DNS solutions, right? The perimeter around your enterprise, for most large enterprises, is porous at best on a good day, and more accurately, we would all laugh and say it's gone, right? Between cloud, software-defined WAN, mobile devices, IoT, your security stack, is broken in more than a few places, and you know where they are, right? So DNS is a cool way to build out foundational security, and it gets you one control point that you can grab for all on-premise and cloud deployments. It gives you an architecturally efficient and absolute control point that can leverage your threat intel, protect you against DNS tunneling, attacker tricks to beat threat intel like dynamically generated domains. Anytime someone needs to get to an IP address, they would have to go through DNS, and so foundational security integrated with threat intel wrapped around that is a great tool that that's still new to many. And so it's something worth learning about. Security patches, firmware updates, strong passwords. You guys and gals know. Big red alert on RDP servers for sure. RDP servers remain dangerous and deadly and often unprotected. So with that, I bring to end the main part of our presentation and hand the baton back to Navneet.
All right. Thank you, Mike, and thank you for going into detail, talking about, give us a closer look at the ransomware variant. Now, we do have some questions that came in. The first question is, what is the connection between Grandcrab and Sodinokibi? Is it the same attack groups, the same code base?
Aha. So that's an interesting question. As I mentioned earlier, the cyber criminals behind Grandcrab said they were closing up shop. They earned their $2 billion, and it was hasta la vista. Notwithstanding their friendly retirement message, it appears that Grandcrab had made prep to rebrand under, other ransomware services and started this before their retirement. My recollection is that in June or July of this year, Krebs on security noted that there was various forensics to suggest, right, that the Grandcrab team moved to new programs, and Krebs said one name is Revil. It's R-Evil, Sodine, or of course Sodinokibi. There are also interesting comparisons in the way that Grandcrab and Revil generate URLs that are used in the attack. There's a Dutch firm called Tesorian, a Dutch security firm, and my recollection is that they noted that the code bases differ, but there were many, very coincidentally similar ways that the code generated URLs, and so it's like the random length of the file name was repeated, so they suspect these things were linked. So has the team at Grandcrab required, or is Sodinokibi, their resurrection? I believe, and this is you could take with half a cent, right? It seems really unlikely that after making $2 billion, cyber criminals would abandon such a massive business. Our threat intel team in the Northwest will continue to watch the situation closely and will update us as they learn more. But I don't think these guys have gone away, and I think, there is some evidence that Grandcrab and Sodinokibi are related, so keep tuned.
Thank you. I'm sure that was a great answer to the question that was asked. Another question, it came from they're a mid-sized bank, and they said that you mentioned some of the networks attacked by Megacortex showed that Emotet and Quabot were in the network. They would like you to explain a bit more about that. And like I mentioned earlier, they're a mid-sized bank, and they view Emotet as a likely threat.
Interesting. So you mentioned Emotet and Cacbot. I'm never sure how to pronounce some of these exotic names.
Yes, I can't either.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely in banking. Even though Emotet's, oldie, it's from a ransomware perspective, from a threat perspective, it's an oldie but a goodie. Emotet started in banking. Some of the facts suggest that Megacortex ransomware is found on networks that are already infected with Emotet and CACBot. So Emotet, started as a banking Trojan, but now added the capability to deliver other malware. Now, it's uncertain as to whether these tools are part of the delivery chain for Megacortex, but there's this circumstantial evidence, right? So there's growing information about the methods of distribution for Megacortex, and we're watching the coincidence of Emotet and other things that may distribute it. Some researchers are pretty sure that this ransomware is delivered to targeted computers using Trojan downloaders. And then, once this stuff is inside, again, as we said before, it gets access to a domain controller and spreads across your network. So yes, there is a possibility more than coincidentally between the presence of Megacortex, Emotet, and CACBot. Our threat intel team will continue to monitor the situation and report facts as we know more.
Okay, thank you for that. Another question is that how do people view a small security event such as a ransomware attack on a few workstations? Is this what you call a data breach?
It sounds like, policy question. So most commercial firms, if it hit a few workstations, would view this as a security incident, but not a data breach in and of itself, especially if this only impacted a handful of workstations and then was contained. Now, interestingly enough, in the United States healthcare industry, under the requirements for HIPAA, which is the Healthcare Insurance Portability and Accountability Act compliance, the administrator of HIPAA, which was Health and Human Services, issued an opinion several years ago that if the data can be accessed and encrypted, unknown to the defender till it's encrypted, then it must be assumed that the data was also breached. This triggers, for the healthcare, company, requirements and obligations under HIPAA. Now, I would never know this were it not for the fact that in a digital healthcare company, I had duty as the data privacy officer. They had close to 1 million patient records. And so you had one workstation encrypted. You had a data breach to report. And everyone on this call knows that if data breach happens on your watch, it's like, it doesn't matter what it is. It's high pain, it's suffering. And when you're explaining to management why it happened, you're losing. The more you talk about it, the worse it gets. So yes, a successful but even small infection by ransomware could be considered a data breach, depending on your industry or your company policies.
Got it. Thank you so much. Another question. The person said that you mentioned foundation security involving DNI/DNS would support threat intelligence. How would this work? And they also said that they have multiple cloud separate on-premise facilities. And and they have remote offices where they use SDN and mobile devices with access to most applications.
Okay. Well,
so yeah, that's
so that's an interesting one. So I think they meant DDI/DNS, where DDI is the shorthand for the integration of DNS, DHCP, and IPAM, right? It's sort of, what we call core foundational security. In the past, some pieces of this have been administered far on the network side, but a lot of it is moving into the cybersecurity team domain because of the value it provides. So let's look at this from the 1,000-point view. Every application and activity, including malware and legitimate applications, have to go to your DNS server to reach the internet. If it wants to talk to some command and control, if it wants to do something ugly, every IP address is visible through that DNS server inflection point. The DNS server is the traffic cop, and it's a key area you can leverage with this, what we call foundational security, to validate traffic. So now to answer your question, right, by integrating all of your threat intel with your DNS, you can provide a layer of protection and additional risk reduction pretty much across all of your networks. It doesn't matter where things are coming from, cloud, on-premise. You can combine your threat intelligence right at the critical point of the DNS IP lookup, and you can add other capabilities, such as we have things like machine learning, other capabilities that really, preserve and protect and help manage, this moment of IP lookup. And this gives you, while your perimeter has wasted away, right? We know that. It kind of gives you another throat you can grab, one point of entry and egress that you can monitor. Virtually 100% of potential malware has to go to DNS, right? They have to go back to some IP, and that's where you can catch them and stop them. A very small commercial, the Infoblox product, Blocks One Threat Defense, basically allows you to leverage, DNS, DHCP, and IPAM, across everything you do. You're on-premise and your cloud. It doesn't matter. You've got one place to administer and gain visibility to it. There's many capabilities you get. You can secure the networks you have. I'm sort of running through my mental tick list here. You can block data exfiltration. You can detect and block malware, certainly by threat intel signatures or things like that. Machine learning can also detect behaviors. You can implement policies for web filtering, automate incident response. You can integrate with SOAR. You can speed up threat investigations because all of your IP address information is handy and right there where your SOC, your SOC team can get it. So you leverage that IPAM and asset metadata. So in summary, all because you have a tight grip around the throat of DNS activity, malware and cyber thieves cannot operate without access to that. And so it can be a very powerful tool to leverage that foundational security.
Thank you so much, Mike, for the thorough answer. Now we're going to come to the conclusion of the presentation. And if you asked a question and we didn't get a chance to answer it, don't worry. We'll personally reach out to you with an answer to your question. And thank you so much, Mike, for doing a wonderful job on explaining all the ransomware threats that are out there and going in detail. We really appreciate your insight. All the attendees, just want to once again let you guys know that you guys will get a copy of the slides and the recording of this webinar in a follow-up email after the live event, and we'll be giving you guys a couple of assets to as a follow-up for this webinar. And we will also would like to get your feedback. So please, if you can just, after the webinar is over, remember to take a customer survey satisfaction so we can get your feedback. And on behalf of Infoblox and our presenter, Mike, thank you all for joining us today and have a great rest of your day. Thanks.
Thanks. Bye-bye.